Good evening from Yorkshire. I'd like to talk to you today about a plant called hogweed. I feel like I'm on a bit of a one-woman campaign to save the reputation of hogweed. She's got a bit of a bad reputation by association with her big sister, Giant Hogweed. So we're going to look firstly at some of the nominal aspects of the plant hogweed, because in hard times in the countryside, actually they use this plant to feed livestock, including pigs. And I know from chickweed, we've got chickens love chickweed, geese love goosegrass. So hogweed, because it was actually used to feed pigs. Its Latin name is Heracleum spondylium. And its big sister is Giant Hogweed. Now we're going to talk a little bit first about Giant Hogweed and why she's got such a bad reputation, and why I feel quite defensive really about this little sister. So Giant Hogweed, you're probably aware, has a cream flower like this, but it's the size of a dinner plate. It's like this size, and also the plant is, a good couple of meters, even taller. And the stems are much more like an inch thick rather than the kind of thickness of the Heracleum spondylium, common hogweed. Now, the giant hogweed's got a bit of a bad reputation because it's the sap. If you get the sap of it on your skin, it's particularly worse for small children and old people. But if you get the hogweed sap on your skin and then the sun goes on it, you get phytophotosensitivity, and that's actually the sap works at the DNA level, altering the DNA in your body, and it can lead to permanent scarring. So it's really not nice to get the sap of the giant hogweed on you. Now, I just want to mention, because I said I was kind of feeling a little bit defensive for this plant, all she is doing when she does that with the giant hogweed is she contains a chemical called Furanocoumourins, and what that chemical is it's antifungal. If you think about it, plants are under attack all the time from bacteria, from virus, and from fungus, at root level and in the air. So they tend to pump out chemicals to protect themselves. So that's all Furanocoumourins is. It's an antifungal protective chemical for hogweed. And other plants, by the way, as well, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So it turns out that giant hogweed is more kind of harmful for the phytophototoxicity because it contains 3 in particular Furanocoumourins that common hogweed doesn't have. And on the whole, it contains what we call linear Furanocoumourins, which tend to be harsher, whereas common hogweed contains angular Furanocoumourins, which is why we can eat this one. So in a minute we're going to look at all the different kind of the edibility of common hogweed throughout the year, but I just wanted to kind of defend them a little bit and explain what was going on there with that the chemical that's known to burn skin. Okay, so we can find common hogweed in the countryside along grass verges, and in the towns and cities along path edges. She's a plant of the edge, basically. She likes to live on the edge. Oh, I wanted to say one more thing about Furanocoumourins. When we talk about eating the seeds on this, a lot of people talk about getting a kind of reaction in the mouth, and it's because it's the same thing that's going on with celery allergy. I don't know if you've seen a lot of menus these days say they contain celery as a warning, because we've got an increase in people having reactions to celery. And the reason that is because celery is prone to fungal attack. So when farmers are getting reduced yields because of fungal attack, they kind of do things to the plants to make them more resistant. So in trying to make celery more resistant, what's happened is the plant has pumped out more Furanocoumourins to protect itself and to be more antifungal. So then when we're eating celery, it's causing this sensitivity. So that's one of the reasons why there's been this increase in celery. So do not feed hogweed to anybody that has a celery allergy. You might have heard of it in grapefruit as well, by the way. So now we've sorted the whole kind of toxic skin burning sap issue out of the way, you absolutely can eat hogweed, and she is delicious, right? The whole taste profile of hogweed, Heracleum spondylium, is a kind of warm, fragrant, spicy taste. How to eat her throughout the year. Around about April time, just as she's pushing through the ground, you'll get kind of stems, central stems that are maybe 8 inches long. You can cut those off around about April, depends where you are in the country of course, and then you can cook those like asparagus, so just steam fry them and serve them with a knob of butter. And like I say, it's got this kind of vegetable taste but with a hint of spice. As the plant starts growing up and getting leaf buds, so kind of round about late April, May time, you'll start to see it forms leaf buds that are quite big. They're like that size. All we've got left at the moment, this is mid-June now here, so it's in its kind of zenith, but before these leaves unfurled, they were all packed tightly. I've got one here to show you. They're all packed. I've got one here to show you. They're all packed tightly inside these little leaf buds. Now if you imagine these leaves were all crammed into there, okay? So what I like in this too, these little leaf buds, is a lot of broccoli. Before this is opened, all crammed in there, and it's a little bit like broccoli crammed inside a little purse. So how I would cook these is, you want maybe 3 to 4 buds per person, and just pop them in the frying pan with a lid on and some water, and you're kind of going to steam fry them. So you will know when they're cooked inside because the little pouch that they're in, this little pouch, will go see-through. Not totally see-through but more translucent, and then you know it's cooked on the inside. So at that point you take off the lid, throw in a knob of butter and some salt. Also what is nice is something a little bit sweet, because it's got this kind of fragrant spicy taste to the vegetable, and you can then kind of caramelize it a little bit. So without the lid you're kind of going to fry it, so that crisps up that pouch, and it's absolutely delicious. Now as the plant gets a bit bigger, you're familiar with these cream flowers. As the plant gets a bit bigger, before this cream flower comes out, it too was in one of those little pouches. So I liken that to cauliflower in a little parcel, and you can cook them in exactly the same way as the leaf buds. So kind of lower down and earlier on in the season you've got access to the leaf buds, and then a bit taller on and later in the season you've got access to the flower buds, and you can steam fry them both exactly the same. Then you get the flower. Here we are, like I say, mid-June. And this is out everywhere, and it's at its zenith now. You've got the flowers here, but also, so you've got all parts of it going on really. You've got the flowers and the seeds up at the top in mid-June. Now, there isn't that much that we talk about using the flowers of hogweed for, but pretty quickly, it's one of the early seeders, we've got this seed head comes out. Now, thank you. These green seeds of hogweed, these aren't quite ripe yet, but they will get wider. They're kind of like 5mm flat discs, slight lines on them and a little pointy top. Sometimes they can dip in the middle at the top as they get older. These seeds are edible, but even just one tiny seed eaten like that is a taste explosion. If I tell you that it tastes like a combination of washing up liquid and orange peel, I know that I'm not selling it, okay? But when these go brown, so there's very little that we would do with these green really because they are so strong, but hold that thought of the orange peel, because when these die and you tend to get, they die on the head, you know, there's loads left at the end of summer, full heads of brown seeds. I've got some left from last year here. This is what they look like when they're brown. You can see that. So sometimes the brown seed heads will actually stay on hogweed right until kind of November time. You can still find the seeds. Even some of them will overwinter, and you'll see a frame, a skeletal frame of the last year's hogweed with a few brown seeds clinging to the top. So these seeds now, they've lost that washing up liquid taste, you'll be pleased to know, and what it's left is a more kind of warmer burnt orange taste. So if you think about that burnt orange taste, a really nice way to use these is in dark chocolate mousses. You can grind them up into a powder and put a pinch in dark chocolate mousses. I like to make like a native spiced chai latte, or just a spicy tea with these, and with wood avens root, which contains eugenol, which is exactly the same phytochemical as in cloves, so it gives that clovey taste, and ash key seeds. yeah, not the wings but the seeds. Those three together, kind of this combination of our kind of UK spices. So hogweed seeds are one of our kind of UK spices, if you like. So you can grind them up and put pinches in savoury dishes like normal curries and things, but I find it particularly goes nicer with sweet things. So if you were doing something like a custard tart where you would normally put cinnamon, you could sprinkle a little bit of the dried powdered hogweed seeds. Dark chocolate mousses, milky eggy puddings is what I think it goes nicest with, and just as a chai drink. If you've been on any of my walks or you've done my online wild food course, you will know about my 4-step process for avoiding identification errors, or the process for how to avoid death, I call it. And it's quite relevant for this kind of, oh, I've got one of my bees on there. It's quite relevant for this particular family, these things with the kind of cream umbella for flowers. So I've got a 4-step process in my walks and my courses. A lot of foraging teachers will say don't eat anything unless you're 100% certain. So when it comes to identifying hogweed in particular, I'm going to give you some tips now, but as a general rule, I have a 4-step process that helps reduce the margin of error when it comes to identification. And you can find that if you come on any of my foraging walks or in my online course. So, how to avoid identification errors then when identifying hogweed. So hogweed grows in the same hedge that we might find cow parsley and but also hemlock, poison hemlock. Now poison hemlock is deadly and the flowers look very, very similar to hogweed. So what I'm going to do now is give you some tips on how to differentiate them. When you become more familiar with the leaves, it's quite obvious at leaf level that the differences between hogweed and hemlock. Hemlock has a much kind of finer leaf with more little grooves on it, whereas if you look at the leaves of hogweed, they're really quite kind of chunky and substantial. Sometimes they can be a bit more roundy edged than that. But at leaf level, it's quite obviously different. But at flower level, and because they're in the same hedge, then it's not always easy to differentiate them, especially at this time of the year. So here we are, mid-June, and we've got hogweed all around us, but also in mid-June we've got hemlock has made its appearance. It comes out a little bit later than hogweed. Now hemlock has very similar flowers but very different leaves, but I want to give you some other identifying features to do with hogweed so that you don't get them mixed up. The first is, we've already said it comes out later, but once they're out then that's no help. The stem of hogweed is ribbed, it's kind of grooved. I'm going to get one for you now. Sorry. So the stem of hogweed is ribbed and hairy. Can you see it's grooves there? And if you turn it around you can see hairs. There's one of the little leaf buds, look, it's empty now, but that will have been filled with this leaf when it was just potential. So hogweed has hairy, ribbed stem. Hemlock has very smooth stems, no ribs and no hairs. Right, so that's factor one. The other thing is hogweed, this is all green, my hogweed here at the farm, but you can get hogweed that's got quite significant purpley patches. So not to get it mixed up with Angelica sylvestris purpurea, which is very purple. Sometimes hogweed can have big patches of purple on it, and that makes it a bit difficult because hemlock also has bits of purple on it. However, hemlock reddy purple is kind of like paint splatters, whereas the reddy purple patches on hogweed look like they've been kind of aerosol sprayed on. So that's another way of differentiating aerosol spray versus a bit more like a splatter on hemlock. Okay, so ribbed, hairy stems and purpley spray for hogweed. Hemlock is very smooth, no ribs, no hairs, and any red marks on it look like they've been splattered like that, reddy purple. Another method of identifying is the leaf stem here. So remember we talked about celery, and you know how celery has that like a U-shaped profile to its stem, its leaf stem? Well, it turns out so do hogweed leaf stems. I don't know if you can see that, but it's got like a U-shaped profile to it, very much like celery. You might see more at the top. It's got like a groove all the way down the leaf stem. Hemlock doesn't have that. It has kind of round stems. So you've got 3 different ways of kind of differentiating there. All right, you've got the hairs and the grooves on the stem. You've got the fact that hogweed is more kind of sprayed purple, whereas hemlock is like splattered. And then you've got the U-shaped profile to the leaf stem on hogweed. So what happens, if you've been on one of my courses and you've got the 4-step process, you should not make this mistake at all. If you have been on any of my courses, you will know that you would do your 4-step process, which involves variable checking, but also it would involve having 1 mouthful and spitting, and then waiting 20 minutes and having another mouthful and swallowing it. If you have made a mistake that way, you've only got 1 mouthful in you. But what happens if you do happen to mix your hemlock and your hogweed up? Well, hemlock is pretty nasty. It acts like a neurotoxin in that it will basically shut down your nervous system, causing anything that functions to stop functioning. So that would be your lungs, your liver. You would go into unconsciousness and then you would die. So it's quite a serious mistake to make. So please don't go lightly when it comes to starting to forage for the umbellifers. All right. Some people I know have mixed up elderflowers even, but obviously elderflower grows on a tree, albeit cut into a hedge, but it has a woody stem to it, a hard woody stem, whereas hemlock and hogweed grow up from the ground with a kind of green thin stem that's bending and bowing, no bark on it. So hogweed, Heracleum spondylium, I feel like, yes, I am on a one-woman campaign to save her reputation because she tastes so delicious, and she is much maligned because of that negative association with the big sister and the kind of the photosensitivity caused by the sap. And like I say, I'm quite defensive about the fact that that is just a by consequence of her trying to protect herself from fungal attack at root level. So thank you for joining me, and I would love to know in the comments below if you've tried hogweed and what you think of it. Thank you, bye!